just kind of craziness that's going on right now.
I mean, I don't know what is going on. It's everything's so much filtered through media. I mean, you look at one news source and you'll see one perspective. You look at another, you see another perspective, and nobody really cares about the objective voice. It doesn't seem like.
Well, I mean that's a very fair point. I mean everything people really see. I mean it's definitely it's through the lens of what large corporations kind of want you to see and
And
hear.
people who aren't even there,
Yeah.
like even about me, the vast majority of articles written are by people that never even spoke to me. It's like, I don't know. It's a very strange thing. Like, how could they possibly have the proper perspective or context just by their interpretation of something I said? It's weird.
No, I think that's a very fair point. And I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, I'm not I actually saw you on you did an episode on Jimmy Dore's show, and that's how I came across your work like a week ago. So when it comes to you and your work, like I'm kind of like a little bit like newer to it. And I'll be honest with you, like I don't even necessarily like agree with Jimmy Dore on everything. It was kind of like he makes some stuff. I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting point. I haven't really heard people on the left kind of say some of the stuff that he says. So that's even how I came across your work. And then obviously I've seen, you did all these other interviews. I'm like, wow, like this is like, it's interesting that like your voice is out there. So, I mean, I definitely, I want to hear what you kind of have to say. And yeah, hopefully, it'll turn out to a good interview. Hopefully, usually I don't think I do too many bad interviews. So hopefully at worst, it'll just be a mediocre one.
And you
So,
can you can go anywhere. Don't like worry about questions, man. I hate not being challenged. It's so boring.
okay. Well, perfect. Then, yeah, I guess we can get started then. All right. Hi, welcome to TalkSpot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Dr. Michael Wood. Dr. Wood, thank you for coming on.
Of course, anytime with such kind offers and welcoming into the party. After you had this ability that you may have probably should have made me wait for at least a good 10 minutes after I completely abandoned you the other day. So I have to publicly apologize for that.
It's no problem at all. That's not very that's a very common thing that'll happen where people will just whatever happens like it sometimes happens to me too where I'm just going back and forth through email and then I forget to mark it down and all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, I forgot about that call or this or that. But yeah, it's no problem at all. But yeah, so I just I guess so we can get started, like would you mind telling us a little bit about your background?
I mean, I never know where to start, so I'll just like give the quickest synopsis I possibly can. Typical poor white kid grew up in the suburbs of Baltimore, in and around like the line. Baltimore's a weird city that it has these hard lines. It doesn't have a metro, but that's besides the point. Grew up in that area, kind of in the 90s, where we had a very, I always have to point out, because we had a very non-race mentality at that time. So a lot of people, that's what they're looking fondly back on when it comes to race relations, is this time period in the 90s where everybody was watching Cosby and Martin and Sanford and Son and all these different types of shows where we just felt like there was a lot of balance and everybody was enjoying each other's culture as American as one. So I kind of grew up in that. A weird thing about being lower class is that there are two ways out of lower class, and I decided to grab onto both of those. And that was through the military when I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did an infantry-related field there called the Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team. Did that for 4 years, left the Marine Corps, and joined the police department, which was always my intent to eventually be a police officer. Ended up settling to go to Baltimore, primarily because that's where the action is. I felt like that was being a real cop, just like being a Marine was being a real military member. Went through policing in Baltimore, get into details of any of that little aspects, but just slowly as I ascended the ranks and opportunities to see more in depth of what policing was, tried to focus on my own education, starting off with a criminal justice bachelor's while I was a detective. And I just started to see that what we were doing as police didn't have the outcomes that everyone was intending. and this really started when I was in covert as not an undercover. I was like a secret cop, more like a recon, not somebody that was in their faces. I was hiding, and I was watching drug dealers and gangs run their operations. And it just, you start to see the city from a more objective lens there. Whenever you have the uniform is like a camera. So whenever that camera's there, whenever that uniform's there, reality is it is misperceived in some way. It's changed. So I got to see things without me there and started to feel that a lot of what we were doing ended up actually making the neighborhood worse by getting in these cycles of arrest and repeat and make things worse for people because of the criminal justice system and things like that. And just began to think about and focus more specifically on why policing does this and what ways we could do it better if there are ways, and what was really causing the issues. Because obviously locking up a drug dealer on the corner to have him replaced with another drug dealer on the exact same corner the next day didn't really make much sense. So I evolved through leaving the police department as a medical retirement because of some weird rule they have when you're injured, and I had to have a couple of shoulder surgeries. So they pushed me out. I mean, that was their own doing. And then I focused more on I went to get my master's and my PhD and started focusing on the actual research behind policing and what has gotten us here. That's as quick as I can go.
Okay.
Oh, and I got some fame, I guess like a minor celebrity thing 4 years ago because I tweeted some stuff playing around on Twitter that resulted from watching my police department of Baltimore kind of deny all responsibility for the Freddie Gray killing, when the primary focus of this, we could argue about whose fault it was, but as the agency, there was no way around this being our fault. You have to be able to arrest a 120-pound male and get him to the prison cell safely at the very minimal.
No, that's a very fair point. And I feel like, I guess for people to understand kind of like modern policing, I mean, when did things kind of, I don't want to say change, but who's kind of like the father, I guess, of modern policing in the United States, and kind of what's, I don't know, I guess suppose like what's like the philosophy behind it? Like what's, sorry about that. I guess, hopefully the question doesn't sound too dumb, but I guess, yeah, kind of the idea of like, who are the people that have really kind of shaped the way that police departments, especially in major metropolitan areas, actually go about interacting with the public?
I don't think there is any who. So our law evolves from English common law. So we kind of know that pathway quite clearly. Our laws evolved from these common laws, and they branched out through the judiciary and through legislation to have like tentacles that go out in different ways. But policing as an organization in America, and each country is different. So in England, it started as a night watch, but in America, it started as slaves patrols. That was the official type of first kind of organized policing that we had. It was more flawless at that time, obviously. So that was one issue that they had, was with the slave patrol starting up, and then it evolved and branched out into a larger type of night watch idea. And so coming from England, it's fair to assume that like Sir Robert Peel, the kind is credited kind of with modern law enforcement, contemporary law enforcement roots as a pure philosophy. But I find his specific philosophies really convoluted and kind of missing the issue. They're not actually what we do. When they talk about protect and serve, that's not actually what police do. Police protect and serve government interests and their state interests. They don't actually protect people or have any legal obligation to protect people. They're literally law enforcement officers. So we have this reality, this objective reality of what police are in a codified sense. And then we have this kind of idealized version of what police are, and we credit that system, but it really doesn't have a connection to what modern policing is. The only pure connection you can get to is the militarization of policing. But I would have to say that we as a community, we as a people, have designed and agreed upon policing the way it is. I don't find that it's far from what people expect and want.
So you definitely you said a lot of things there that I think are worth impacting. But one thing that you said is the term, serve and protect. And I mean, and Jimmy Dore, the person, who you've been on his show before, he kind of rightfully pointed out, at least because I've been watching quite a bit of his coverage about, just everything going on right now with the Floyd protests and everything. And, he kind of says, for it seems like the motto that you're hearing a lot more from police departments is this idea of like, I have to get home at night. This idea of, I have my family and I have to get home at night. And from a person who is not a police or, I'm not a police officer or a cop. I mean, I can totally understand that aspect, like if you have a wife and kids, of course you want to get home to see them. I think that's totally justifiable. I can completely understand that. But I mean, again, from a lay person's perspective who has no law enforcement background, I always perceive the serve and protect. It's like, okay, well, I thought that was the motto. I mean, that's what's on the side of, police officers' cars oftentimes. And I thought that was kind of the motto of like, you know, I thought the whole idea was supposed to be, these are people that are willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of the community, for the good of their cities. And I thought that even trumped even personal concerns, almost something like akin to like the Secret Service, which is, these people are willing to, I mean, theoretically, they're supposed to if something were to happen, they're supposed to risk their lives to protect the life of the president. That's the whole institution is built for that. So it's interesting what you were saying, though, the whole idea of, basically how they're made to really protect, it's not really the community members as much as it is other parties. I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I mean, I guess, yeah, would you mind maybe kind of, I guess, going into a little bit more detail about the whole aspect of just like, I guess from a philosophical standpoint, like who are the police and police forces? Like who really are they serving? Like, I mean,
Sure.
obviously, like if you're a normal, quote, normal person, like if I see my neighbor's house getting, and like somebody's robbing their house or they're breaking in, I mean, if I call the cops, I mean, they'll show up. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that.
Uh, well, one thing I have, I mean, like serve and protect is obviously just a motto. You said the word yourself. It's literally a motto. It's not codified in anything, even the policies that are there. But I have to point out that most people have the expectation, most Americans would agree. This is one of my big problems with the left. So the left tends to act like they actually have the majority and they promote democracy, but they're nowhere near having the majority of the country's opinion. The vast majority of people would also believe that cops shouldn't have to go to work and lay down their lives enforcing the laws in a place such as America. They perfectly understand and would wrap themselves around that concept, and that is why they have allowed and supported a system that has codified that police can defend themselves not when they are objectively in danger, but when they just simply feel in danger. There's the system, the laws, the actual reality. I don't care what people believe things to be. The actual reality is that we have entrusted police to make individual ethic decisions based upon how they feel, not upon what the community wants them to do. So we have another aspect of that is really in the criminal justice system as a whole as well. Another contradiction is that we have to separate the human responses from what we do as expectations. So the key fundamental problem to me with the criminal justice system is it's primarily focused on revenge as being justice. And there's nothing remotely associated about justice and revenge. These are not synonyms that make any sense at all. They're just a constant cycle of vengeance and seeking to have the most power. So we need to understand that the individual victim will feel and expect vengeance. That's a human root. But the system that we all subscribe to must make the idea more that we want to prevent these things from recurring in the future. It should have nothing to do about caring that much about the past. We want to protect the population from what we just learned, and then which can obviously mean prisons. Not everybody's going to be able to be on the street. Sorry. So then we have to continue from that and say, how do we prevent this from recurring? in the most moral and ethical way possible. But we have never done that. We have never in policing in this country, or I don't believe anywhere in the world, have we tried to figure out what caused the actual crime and how to prevent it in the future. So there is no association with justice. Another aspect of that, I know I go on, but we have to go back to it. I'm trying to clear it all up. Another aspect of that is just the pure system of a representative government doesn't very much align with policing. When the mayors and elected officials are in charge of policing, they do not have a long-term enough of an incentive to do the things that contribute most to crime issues and violence. More so, crime is a vastly more complicated issue, but specifically violence. The things we know that cause violence and how we can fight them aren't being done because these things are on very long-term time scales, which serves no political interest. So even when we're fighting for shorter terms, as long as police are in that control, you're actually fighting for more confused and deep state style policing.
So you talked about the vengeance aspect of it, and I mean, this would be really interesting to hear your take about this. But let's say you have a person who I don't know, is like a person that's into sexual crimes against children. I mean, for a person like them, how many of people that have that kind of, I mean, I guess it might be a little hard to know the exact answer to this, but at least in your experience, like the people that have that in their mind and they have that, I mean, I personally think that that's like an evil act. Like I believe in like evil and good, but I mean, I think something like that like is one of the worst things you could do to somebody is sexual assault against children. How many of the people that have things like that in their mind don't partake in real life, like actually materialize it, assault a child? How many of them are actually dissuaded by the fact that they're going to go to jail? I mean, obviously, like people know that that's a crime, and yet like it still happens. I mean, like I guess the question is, are people really dissuaded from committing crime because they're fearful of the punishment, especially at like a higher level, the people you really want in jail? I mean, maybe the people that, I don't know, are petty thefts or thieves, maybe they might think, okay, well, it's not worth it for me to steal this six pack of like booze or whatever, or I'm going to steal, this video game from Target or something. Like maybe they might be dissuaded, but do you think the people at this like higher level, are they really afraid of the consequences of their action, or like, what do you think?
This isn't a what I think issue. So like even issues with like good and evil, those are individual opinions. And in this topic of how government and systems are organized, good and evil is irrelevant. We're talking about how a system and how people respond. What evidence do we have that systems respond this way and that people respond this way in whichever issue you're talking about? So when it comes to pedophilia and the people that don't react, I would think the vast majority of them don't offend. But it's not because they don't offend because of fear of punishment as a deterrence. There's absolutely no correlation to violence being associated with deterrence from an outside force. The only time that works is with violations. So by violations, I mean administrative issues, speeding, failing to park in the proper spot, things like that. There should be a distinction between crimes of violence and things that are just societal violations of the social contract. So yeah, force will manage violations of the social contract, but they will not manage expressions of violence.
So
you're talking about rational choice theory, which is completely disproven. I mean, it was disproven in like the 80s.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I've kind of wondered that before, where it's this idea of, I mean, people, I mean, again, I mean, maybe people might not know every law that exists, because I don't even know if lawmakers know every law that exists in a city or a state. But I mean, like, I have to believe that, I mean, everyone who like kills someone, if they go that far, I mean, they have to know that it's a crime, like, especially if it's premeditated. I mean, you know that you're committing a crime, and you just, I mean, you just don't care. You don't care. I mean, in my mind, that rationally makes sense.
Care. See, that's the question. So what causes violence is the question. It's not that these people don't care. They're going through a momentary biological issue. Something has gone wrong. When people say, oh, I can't believe he did that, or this was so out of his character. Yeah, I mean, of course it was. Those people didn't expect themselves to do that either. We have to recognize that we're an ape that has certain issues that go on. So the reason that violence is higher in many communities is the biggest correlate is lead poisoning. It lowers your medulla oblongata, whatever, and it makes you have less impulse control, and it lowers your IQ. So by the time you're an adult, you're somebody that has a violent tendency, and you have a lower intelligence level, and this is because you were poisoned. It's not because you don't care.
Wow. Wait. You got to go a little deeper than that. I've never heard that before. Wait, so
this is why this is like anybody can type this in. So if you're in front of a computer right now, type lead and violent crime correlate. Just look at the images and you'll see the parallel. They exactly parallel in like an 18 to 22 year delay, because that's when typically a male, is old enough to be able to execute violence that the state has to do something about, and it registers on the scale. So that's why there was a crime reduction in the 90s nationwide, because of the CAFE standards taking lead out of the gas. So you had a national reduction there. As we've made different steps in different places, New York has lowered their lead levels to the lowest in the entire nation of big cities, and that's why they have the lowest crime of any big city.
Wow, man, you're totally right. There's a bunch of things just came up for that. I'm definitely gonna have to look into. I mean, I'll be honest with you.
Parallel. They're essentially mirror images.
Wow, I'm gonna have to definitely look into that. I've never heard that before, and
you could Google which countries are still using leaded gasoline, and you'll see that these are the terrorist nations.
Ooh, man, you've definitely given me some homework. That's really fascinating. One thing I wanted to ask about, and again, I mean, maybe this might just be a thing where maybe my perception might be off, but it seems like a lot of police forces seem to be more, for lack of a better term, I guess, militarized than, I don't know. You look in the past, like I don't know, like even like the city I live in, it's a normal suburban city. I mean, with like people.
Story's known. Yeah. So this is a known story, the known pathway. It started with the LA, the North Hollywood shootout.
Yeah. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind, maybe talking a little bit about, like I guess the militarization of a lot of police forces. So I mean, that incident that you're talking about, is that where was it like a bank robbery and they had like bulletproof vests on and stuff, or is that what happened?
Right. So the modern militarization of policing started with this incident in North Hollywood, California, where there was a bank robbery with two armed suspects. And two people that were heavily armored, helmets, the full, level, they had the full plating on their outfits all the way down to their legs. They were armored and they were walking around, and with the ammunition they had and the weaponry they had, they were outgunning the LAPD. It's public. Everybody can look up the YouTube videos of this. It goes on for hours, and two people were manhandling the entire LAPD. And from that point on, policing said we can't allow ourselves to be in this situation. And as incidences have progressed, then each time the police have gotten into a cycle of ensuring that they can respond with the biggest force. I mean, that is what policing is. It's the state sanctioned use of violence. It's community violence. Community likes to disassociate themselves from policing, and that's foolish.
That's it. So I mean, because of that incident, I guess to me it's I mean, so you basically had that one incident, and that basically caused a lot of police departments to basically be fearful of that thing can replicate itself in the city. But I feel like,
think about what these riots are doing to police officers now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, and I wanted to definitely ask you about that, is that, obviously, there's this political movement, which is, defunding the police. I mean, that's gaining traction. I mean, that's something that I mean, to be honest with you, I never even really thought of the idea like 3 weeks ago. I feel like if you had told me,
because it's laughable, that's why you never thought of it. Give yourself more credit that you were not convinced by a nonsense idea that's on the surface. Nonsense.
I feel like with the defunding the police, it's like, I'm a person. It's like, if you want to say you want to change certain things, like if you want to, again, if you threw out something to me like, we want to make it so that police unions can't donate to a political candidate or something like that. Like, I feel like that's a reform that I think you could actually potentially do. I mean, maybe it might be a little hard, but like, I feel like I could see that potentially like getting traction and actually passing. But defunding the police, I mean, I feel like that's something that I would have read like 6 months ago on Twitter. If I had seen that, I would have thought like,
Yeah.
okay, like this is the same person that would say, let's abolish all bills, you know, everything's just free. Like I would have, it doesn't even sound like, I mean, like what, I mean, when you heard that, I mean, is it even implementable at all? Like, is that something that could actually happen?
Defunding the police slowly over time, if you're defining police as solely the violent wing of state enforcement, yeah, that's a perfectly fine goal. But this has really evolved to abolishing the police through restricting their resources. When the way it's like trying to think we don't live in a state or a nation state kind of environment. This is the reality, and the entire system of the world is set up already to be able to handle these situations, and you just want to wipe it off like Amber Alerts. How are you going to do Amber Alerts? How are you going to protect kidnapped kids? How are you going to protect sex trafficking victims? Like, what are you talking about? To talk about changing what they do is perfectly fine, but the idea that you're working at the any remote near time frame of abolishing the police will only mean more guns on the street, more violence. It's not, police don't control crime. Absolutely, but they definitely keep a lid on it for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people probably are, where they look and they say, okay, like, you know, the murdering of George Floyd, like that was horrible. I think I mean, I would say that I think a lot of
Just
people.
on that situation though, brother. I mean, like,
Yeah,
this is why I don't like the protesting right now, because I don't understand. Everyone has gone against this situation. The criminal justice system overcharged the cop. I don't like, the cop here is literally doing the job that those community members set him up to do. I mean, I don't understand this idea that locking this individual up has anything to do with ensuring the next person this won't happen to, because you're creating a scenario already with the riots where there's more black victims than anything the police have done in what the last, how many, you would have to add it up for quite a while to find innocent victims of police brutality, and compared to how many lives have been destroyed just already in this protesting that are black innocent lives that we're supposed to be caring about.
yeah,
This
that's
doesn't make sense to me. They charged this dude and overcharged him.
I mean, it's interesting. So you bring up the overcharging aspect, and you know, again, this is something where I think for people that are maybe, you know, just like, you know, we need swift justice and we need, you know, this guy, he killed, you know, George Floyd, and, you know, this Chauvin guy, that Chauvin should, let's crucify him. You know, the issue that, I mean, you know, it's like, okay, fine. Like, I mean, this guy, like he did kill Floyd. And I mean, I think he was a bad guy for what he did. But like, let's say, you know, the murder or the second degree murder charges, I mean, isn't there isn't it less likely that he's going to be convicted of murder 2 than he would have been of murder 3?
Without question. I mean, they could keep all the charges in there and just drop them and adjust later, but you will get into a double jeopardy situation if you stick with only the higher charge and only pursue that higher charge. And sometimes I think that the prosecutors allow this because they know that's the only actual pathway to some sense of justice. And that sounds a little backwards, but you have to remember that we don't know that what this police officer did isn't what he was taught to do, isn't what he's seen on the streets every day, isn't what these actual community members are trying to ask him to do. This is one thing that always bothers me when we start talking about, like, listen to black people in these areas acting like somehow they're different than the rest of America that generally agrees to policing the way it is. All the phone calls I took, 911 calls, were from black people asking me to go arrest other black people. So I don't really understand any of the framing for these issues when we're not working towards a better police department. That's how I was saying, we're stuck in this vengeance idea when all the evidence says that the vengeance idea doesn't do anything. It actually continues the cycle.
So I mean, if we weren't on the vengeance cycle, I mean, what would be the most equitable way to, I guess,
the problem with policing is he's an employee who didn't do his job properly. So I mean, what do you do? You can ensure that he'll never kill somebody else again, because the only time he ever killed somebody in this situation is by arresting them. So you don't allow him to do that job again, and maybe you study it more. But to go after that person is really a scapegoat. It doesn't take care of the fact that the next person to fill those shoes will be no different. You've done nothing.
So would you say then for the issues with a lot of like police departments, I mean, is it more of an institutional issues or are they more personnel issues? Like, do you think that if the rules and everything that's set up the way that it is, if we had, I don't want to say like better personnel, but if it was something, if the personnel was, let's just say different, I mean, would you have the most equitable, I guess, police force you could possibly have if you had the better personnel, or do you think it's like the structure itself where it needs like massive reform from the inside where, this has to change or that has to change? I mean, or I guess, yeah, kind of what's your opinion about that? I mean, is this more of a personnel or is this more like a structural issue?
No, I think all people respond the same way pretty much. You got to step back. There's always anecdotes. So you have to trust things and approach things from how the vast majority of it, the bigger overall picture. So an education is correlated to less use of force complaints from police officers. Fundamentally, you're still not changing anything. The harm to the community will. So let's put it this way. Extremely professional policing, if it were possible by the rules that they involve putting Freddie Gray into the criminal justice system in a nice, smooth, and safe way for him to come out and having the same effects of that criminal justice system. You just masked it from public view. Really, it's about the reduction of complaints, not any kind of fundamental change. So smarter cops can read situations better, know when to use force better, and all of that. And that can reduce the 1,000 police killings possibly. But in the big picture, for the amount, this is why police reform doesn't really take place also. For the big picture, 1,000 killings is largely accepted by the community.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point because, I mean, again, because this is all over the news for the past 2 weeks, I've just seen so many different pieces of information come out, and one of them is, just the idea of, how many people are, I mean, I'm trying to think of how to say it in a way that is accurate, like the amount of people that are involved in a situation that results in their death from a police officer is like far higher in the United States than it is in at least a handful of other Europe. I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen the same thing too, where there's like the image. I mean, that's what I saw. I've seen online this. In the UK it was whatever it was like less than a dozen per year, and whatever Norway or Sweden is like a couple a year, something like that. And then the US, I mean, we're over 1,000 a year, right?
Yeah, well, it tends to, and one of the confusing things is, I don't know, but it seems that it's about as far back as we can go. We're right about the same level of 1,000 per year, and that's regardless of the population. So it's actually lowering because the population's increasing.
Okay.
So it's kind of framed. It is improving.
Wait, so you're talking about
we have a unique situation here. Go ahead, say that part first.
Oh, sorry. No, that's just going to ask is that why does it seem like, so many more people die because of police officers in the US than they do in like other, at least compared to like, industrialized countries?
I would think the biggest reason is because we are more freedom oriented. So violations and interactions with police and compliance is easy to obtain when you're fascist. I would say that we are extremely the opposite of that. So this is the only country where a cop has to be exceptionally concerned that each vehicle has a weapon in it.
That's an interesting point. I mean, because in those countries, I mean, don't even like the police officers, they don't even have guns, right?
A lot of them don't have. I mean, I lived in Japan for 8 months, and I don't think I saw an armed Japanese officer the whole time I was there.
Oh, well, we're in the U.S. I mean, what percentage of Americans are gun owners? Is it like a third or a quarter or half?
And then they have a lot of guns, so there's more than enough for each and every citizen.
I saw the NRA, they released something the other day that said that since January of this year, there's been 2 million more there's been 2 million new first time gun owners. So I don't know what the numbers were before January, but 2 million people began January that have never owned a gun now own a gun, and I mean, I can understand
This is what I
why.
mean by the cycle. If you are going to stand against society's representation of safety, what makes them feel safe. See, people don't actually care what makes them safe. They care what makes them feel safe. And the police tend to make them feel safe. And when you stand up against that, you put fear into everyone and you make them support the stronger, more militarized policing. This is why we're on this cycle. We're not doing anything new. I saw these things happening in Baltimore in the 70s, and they happened 5 years ago, and they're happening now, and nothing will change. It will actually be the same pathway because the pushback against it is not coming from a rational place that people actually understand.
Mm. So for the people, let's say, that are like they just really dislike policing or police officers and just the whole structure, like they actually are people that want the defunding. Like from their perspective, like what's the most obtainable policy changes that could actually happen in police departments? Like what are some things that could actually change? Because obviously, I mean, like you mentioned this earlier, I mean, the defunding, that to me sounds like maybe a couple cities here or there might try it. And, maybe they'll just, instead of having them, be called police officers, they'll be called something else, officers of the peace or something like that. And they won't technically be that, but that's essentially what they'll do. But I mean, what are some ways or what are some reforms that people could actually see police departments make? And yeah, which ones would actually be the ones that people should ask for that like would actually make a difference?
We just simply don't have that kind of information. That's one of our primary issues, is what actually works is not studying. Nobody actually cares about what is effective. So the strongest thing that the data tells us is environmental poisoning. But again, there's not a single police department that's fighting environmental poisoning. So it's not so much that we have armed soldiers going after crime. It's so much that we have armed soldiers going after things that are the symptoms of crime, not the causes of crime. So the biggest thing is to get any agency actually working towards the things that cause the crime. So you're actually doing something. Right now, you're just creating that cycle of prison release, and that gets worse each time. Now, what happens is the rest of society is getting better, which makes it the overall crime reduce. But that doesn't mean that you aren't harming each and every person we lock up. We know that recidivism rates go up. So you're actually putting each person you arrest in this system in a worse predicament. So the whole idea is to change it. Now, defunding police is, or like defunding police abolishment is like a goal. It's not something you could do. It's probably like world peace. It's an idea. It's something you're going towards, but you must take pragmatic steps to getting there each step of the way. So the only thing that I advocate for is, of course, my own system. But anyway, the idea behind my system, which we named civilian-led policing, people can look it up. You can look on my LinkedIn page to see it, or you can look on their Twitter account. And all of that is a system about the table for ideas that are coming up, for a community to decide what to do. I think the very wrong idea is to rely on individual experts to tell you what you need to do. Each and every area is very different. We'll need subtle differences that are very critical, and these decisions should be made by the community member. So my system is all about being able to have the structure in place where you are seeking those 20-year, 30-year, 40-year terms by putting actual invested community members in charge of the policing and accountability for policing. Things like body cameras don't work because they're a tool. Whoever controls the tool is who the tool works for. As long as the mayor and the police department control that tool, it is their weapon. It is not your weapon. So that was foolish. I fought against that from the beginning. Nobody wanted to listen. More black cops is a foolish idea. All crime, all violence is interfamiliar. Black cops are more violent towards black suspects. So if your idea is that you want black cops in black neighborhoods, way to go. You increase police brutality. We know that, settled, done issue. If you actually wanted to live by the racial paradigm, you would put black cops in white neighborhoods and white cops in black neighborhoods. But we're not even remotely thinking about reality.
I think, like when you mentioned this idea of getting like that being the goal of basically civilian policing. I feel like with that goal, that's something that probably in certain like small towns, and I'm sure in the history of America, that's probably largely what actually did happen. And I feel like,
right, but not because of the system. So this
yeah.
is going back to an issue you said before that I failed to address. When it comes to personnel, yes, occasionally you can get benevolent dictators. But just because that system produced one benevolent dictator, as soon as that person is gone, you're back to square one.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I mean, I think back to like, let's say something, I don't know, some town of 500 people in 1880 in wherever state, you want to pick. I mean, I'm sure a place like that, I mean, like I'm sure there had to be a time where the cities like that didn't even have any police officers or any kind of person to actually enforce the law. And yet, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't just a lawless place. I mean,
I don't
then
know. It's called the
basically,
Wild West, bro.
but
It's called the Wild West.
oh, but I mean,
kind
like,
of was lawless.
but I mean, like at one time, I mean, let's say then you go back to like 1680. I mean, like you were saying, I mean, there weren't people walking around called police officers.
This is the safest time in human history in the entire world, ever. People always forget that. There has never been less violence and less crime, less victimization than right now. Never.
Wow. See, I mean, that's the kind of argument where I think like a lot of people like right now, they probably wouldn't believe it. Probably just look at it and it just looks so bad right now.
Right. So the biggest school killing occurred in 1968.
How many people?
68.
Wow.
It was a bombing. Bath Schoolhouse. Look it up. So this is what I'm talking about. Like, we just hear about it now. It's the Twitter thing. And what I think this actually is doing is creating a reverse effect. It's like giving the fringes a voice. I think a big issue going on right now of why it feels divided is that the just completely honestly, the right is trying to have discussions and they're ostracizing their bad parts, and the left is embracing their bad parts and refusing discussion. So it seems like there's something going on that really isn't.
Why do you think that this like this particular killing, like George Floyd's murder, like in his passing, like why do you think that this one has caused such a reaction from politicians where you're seeing like even like Nancy Pelosi, like take the knee. And I mean, again, I mean, I'm not even 30. So, I mean, I haven't studied everything in history, but I mean, I have I have a graduate degree in political science. And it's like, I never remember reading anything like this before where you see the Speaker of the House and mayors and governors, like, I'm trying to think of how to describe it in a way that doesn't sound bad, but like in a sense, they're literally taking a knee. I mean, that's exactly what's happening. And I mean, I saw the video the other day where, like I guess Democrats in Congress, and like after they took the knee, like some of them tried to stand up and they couldn't even stand up because most of them are old, so they had to be like pulled so they could stand up. But
culturally appropriating African garb.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that, I'm just like, this just looks. Yeah, I mean, it just looks. It looked like, to me, it looks totally ridiculous. But I mean, why do you think this one is different than even like incidences from 4 years ago, where 4 or 5 years ago it was, you have a politician come out and say, oh, we condemn this, and that was kind of it from the political standpoint. And now it seems like, I don't know, doesn't this one seem different to you than at least recent instances like this?
Well, what makes us think that it has anything to do with the actual incident? So the incident, sure, it's obviously hard to watch. So that can have an emotional aspect, just in that, sparking a mob sense of vengeance, which obviously kind of a mob mentality has evolved from this when it comes to this. It's not like rational thought on what to do. It's just pure vengeance, like increase the charges, lock them up more. I mean, that's kind of the idea. We need to lock up all the cops. We want them all arrested. And so that doesn't, to me, that doesn't have anything to do with George Floyd's death. It's certainly not promoting that message that it has anything to do with his death. It's not looking to reform the situation. It's just looking for vengeance and to take over the power structure. It's not seeking to end the fundamental philosophical issue of getting vengeance and getting power on everyone. So if it was about policing, they just would have cared about other incidences. So I think maybe this has something to do with being pent up in the House, the state. So it's kind of a broader rebellion against the state from being pent in. And largely the left has to abide by those rules of wearing their mask and doing what the media tells them. So they might have some more pent up frustration than more rural areas that said, no, we're not doing that. So that would be the thing that's associated more with it, I would say, than it is anything that has to do with policing. I mean, you always have to point it out, but Justin Damon was a white woman with blue eyes that was killed by a black cop in that very same city, in that very same department, and nobody gave a shit. These things happen over and over and over. I think particular ones are selected because they just fit the particular narrative at that time. The media goes with it. There is a mob sense in this country right now anyway, when it comes to Twitter and the social media world, where they think it's real life. They think what they're watching on the internet and stuff is real world, but you get on the real world and it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe 1 in 300 people actually even have a Twitter account. So this isn't the real world. And I think they're honestly fighting something they think exists, but it doesn't actually exist.
I think that's a very fair point. Where, I mean, I'm sure you saw the video of I saw him listed as a New York or NYPD police boss. Like, I don't know why he was described like that, but he was giving the speech, and I guess he was a New Yorker, and he's like really fired up, and he's like, you guys are, the media's like, you guys want to treat us so badly and yelling all this stuff. But he said something I thought was really fascinating. He's like, every year there's whatever, like 100 million or like at least tens of millions of police interactions with people. And, most of them aren't violent. Most of them aren't like what you were saying, like administrative, yeah, maybe, you get pulled over for speeding by a cop and you think to yourself like, oh man, that guy was such a dick. But I mean, he didn't harass you, or maybe, he just gave you the ticket. And I mean, I've gotten, a few like tickets and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm never like happy afterwards, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, I guess it went, it didn't go horribly. And I mean, that's probably most people's interactions anyways, but I wanted to point out too that
they do save lives. They do run into burning buildings. They do rescue children, and all those things, you can't take them out of the picture.
Yeah. I mean, I think to myself, like, I mean, if somebody broke into my house or if I saw a crime being committed, I mean, there's no one else I'm going to call. I mean, who else am I going to call but 911 if something like that were to happen? So
I think this whole situation also has really hurt any advocates against gun control, as you were alluding to earlier. I mean, I used to even say, well, why would you need a semi-automatic rifle? And when people said, well, in case there's 15 people coming after me, my retort was always, how the hell did you get 15 people coming after you? But now I understand how that's possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, now it's like you see some of the people, like if they're going to defend their store, if there's, like rioting going on. And yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, now I was in the same boat you're in, where it was, this idea, it's like, okay, I can understand a handgun or shotgun, but I mean, yeah, like we're not living in Call of Duty. It turns out now we actually are living in Call of Duty. I mean, you see, like the other night, you see the other night in Seattle. I mean, I'm sure you saw. It's like the city council member was a part of like this crowd of people that like overtook City Hall, calling for the resignation of the mayor of Seattle. And I look at that, I'm just like, this reminds me of The Dark Knight Rises. Like, did you ever see that movie?
Well, The Dark Knight is definitely, I've seen Rises actually, but The Dark Knight is probably my favorite movie of all time. Everybody has to understand that the Joker is the true hero of Gotham, trying to save Gotham from the tyranny of the vigilante, a billionaire. That's the actual plot line. He's the true hero. Even when he says, he's like, "You think I would trust the future of Gotham, the soul of Gotham, to in a fist fight with you?" Because this is a big, huge issue about he actually saved him. He's the only one that stopped crime. He's the only one that got rid of the mob bosses. All that Batman was doing was running around breaking shit up.
That's an interesting read of that movie. I hadn't thought of it like that before.
Oh, everybody should look it up. There's definitely a few videos that go into all the details of it. It's definitely the actual plot. Yeah, he's the true hero of Gotham. That's why Batman's the Dark Knight.
I like that. Yeah, you raised a good point where you said that maybe for what's going on too, like some of it could just be compounded by the fact that everyone's been in their homes now for essentially at that time like almost 2.5 months. And I think that over the last, I don't know, whatever you want to say, since since March 5th, let's just say, I feel like people have become so skeptical of just the government in general, every aspect. And it's kind of, in a way, I think it's really like rightful. I mean, like, so even let's see, take a look at like the protests, and it's like you have people where, they were told, you have to stay inside. This business has to stay closed. You have to do all this stuff. And everyone said, okay, fine. Or most people said, okay, fine. I might not like it, but these are the laws. This is what I'm being told to do. And I'm being told that this is good for everyone. And then, you have situations where, you have states like California or, other bigger states. And it's, you're still having a slow incremental opening. Like in California, I believe there was like 6 phases to opening beaches. Like literally like 6 phases to opening an outside area that touches the ocean, which goes the entire coastline of California, basically. But you have all these, these steps for that. But then at the same time, especially where the more draconian rules were for lockdown, were typically more in blue states and blue, counties and things like that. But yet these are the same politicians that are advocating for the protests, or you even look at like these healthcare, experts. I mean, these were the ones that were saying, this is, you can get the virus by, touching a door handle 12 hours after someone touched it. There was discussions like that going on. And then, 1,200 of them signed this thing saying, oh, systemic, racial issues in America are as big of a problem as the virus to your health right now. And again, I mean, okay, if we're going to talk about systemic like racism, it's like, okay, I think we can have that conversation for sure. But I mean, you can't literally say it's as dangerous to people's health as this virus that locked down everything. And I think that makes a lot of people
have a systemic racism conversation. We're having a conversation about racist people.
Yeah, that's
my big objection. It's not that cops are racist. That is just not true. This country isn't racist. What it has is the legacy of racism in the system still, because it was crafted that way from a long time ago. It's not that it's still occurring; it's just echoes.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, I think they see what's going on, and I think they have a right to feel skeptical, or they have a right to look at this and just say, like, how does this make sense? Like, how does this make sense that, in Michigan, there's that like 77-year-old guy that like the governor keeps like going after for his barbershop. Like, how is that old guy? I mean, he is a person that you'd say, oh, he's more at risk than somebody that's in their 30s or 40s, but yet, he can't cut hair, but the protests can happen. And I think that's made a lot of people really skeptical of everything. And I think, in the United States, I mean, yeah, maybe people are very angry and vocal about police officers, but I mean, it goes so much deeper than that. I think people are very skeptical of the healthcare industry, medicine, I mean, even people learning about who like their, the public health official was for their counties, learning about them, and you're like, whoa, like this guy said that. Like even the county that I'm living in, like he said something where people were like, what? Like you're talking about locking up people's families to self-quarantine them against their will. Like that's what the county health officer said for the county I live in. And it's like, what? Like involuntarily going to people's homes and stealing them from their families and locking them in a place. Like, what are you talking about here? What country are we living in for that guy to say that? And yeah, I think a lot of people are just, I guess maybe it's just the aspect of just locking them in their houses for 3 months. They're able to think about crazy ideas the whole time.
Yeah, and for what? All they see is their jobs going and then exceptions being made at the willy-nilly. So there is a thing about I don't remember whether it was in Orwell or it was yeah, I think it was in 1984, where he talked about how there is no past, like it's all erased, and all you are in is this perpetual present. So the hypocrisy never counts. They get to change the rules as they go, which is clearly happening. I mean, COVID disappears. Now you can go out in public. Before you weren't. You were killing your mother. There was systemic racism. Then there isn't systemic racism. Now it's these racist cops, and the criminal justice system is wrong. We don't want state violence, but we want state violence to enforce all the rules against the people that we want to enforce them against. And it's like, that's still state violence, bro. I don't know. That is something that is out there and is something that people are going to have to start to deal with. And I think it's very American to be skeptical. One of my good friends, Avi, and we always joke about how I'll complain and I'll bitch to everybody when I predict something 4 years ahead of time, 5 years ahead of time. And I'm like, I told you all this was coming. Nobody listens to me. You guys are freaking stupid. And then, you read Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, when he was running the newspaper, and his saying was, the well-read are misinformed and the unread are uninformed. Essentially, that there's no difference. The media is constantly lying to you throughout all these years. And if you're just now realizing that whatever point in time it is in modern lifetime, if you're just now realizing that the government and the media lie to you, we are all way behind the power curve.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. I mean, politics in the U.S. Yeah, I could see why people would say, oh, it's depressing. Everything. It's just like you said, like the lies. It's the self-interest, and it just goes everywhere. And it just seems like every big institution in the United States. There's so much money involved, so much politics involved, and yeah, I think for a lot of people, you definitely have a right where you look at this and you have, like even the whole mask debate. I saw a thing from like the WHO the other day that said that masks should only be worn by people that are healthcare workers and people that are showing symptoms of being sick. And that's what the WHO was saying. And it's like, wait a minute. So we have this whole mask thing and we don't even know if that even works. Now, there's probably other information I might say differently or whatever, but it's like, what? And then, even a week or two ago, Dr. Fauci comes out and I think he said something along the lines of like our response to the virus might have been an overreaction.
Remember this, the first answer, whether it's science or it's news report, the first thing is always wrong.
I like that too.
We don't have any exceptions of that.
Yeah. So, everyone, we all went gung ho with this. It was, where everyone was living life like normal. And then within a week, almost everything is closed. We're being told that our lives will never return to normal and there's going to be a new normal. And now you have people coming out there saying, oh, well, maybe we overreacted, and it's so jarring. And I think you're a normal person. I feel like it's just so jarring right now. You've been locked in your house. You've been afraid of the virus. You've been afraid of the economic downturn. And now you have the situation where you have these protests nationwide. I think for an average person or even anybody really, I think you just feel like you're just being shaken in a way that national politics really doesn't shake people this much, this in such a short amount of time. And yeah, I think it's just causing people to just freak out even more and maybe think things and tweet things and post. I'm sure you've seen things on Facebook where you're like, wow, like I didn't know that I was friends with so many internet revolutionaries.
I'm down to 96 friends now. I literally go through and I just, every time I see something nonsensical, I'm like, out. Like that as much as I've trimmed my social life. And I think that's actually the positive aspect we should take from all this. I think like sometimes the dying sounds of a bad idea, maybe screaming loudly at the moment, but everyone is realizing that these local communities, our neighbors, matter more than these things we're seeing on Twitter. What is happening here? And if you turn the media off, sure, with the COVID thing, we had a problem with the stores, but if you turn it off, these things don't enter your head. Barack Obama did not grow up listening to this message that black men couldn't achieve, had all these insurmountable barriers. He didn't grow up thinking that. He thought, of course I can do it. Durr. And so he was able to do it. But now that with all these people kind of first being flooded with this idea that they can't, and now being faced with this kind of forceful reality being projected onto them that they need, like these ideas in media and these ideas on the social media aren't actually real on ground level.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised a really good point. I mean, when you
let me tell you real quick. Here's the thing. Here's my Arizona story. So of course I was a leftist, right? Mm-hmm. And I haven't stood for the national anthem in a long time. I don't know if I've ever stood for the Pledge of Allegiance, because I just thought I could pledge allegiance to the concept of America. But if you think I'm going to follow a nation just because it's a nation that I was born in, you're out of your mind. Like, what are you talking about? I don't swear allegiance like that. I'm going to do what I think is morally best at the moment. I'm not going to do that. But anyway, so I would always get shit for not doing that, and then the whole culture changed, and it was like everybody was sitting down. Everybody says, "Oh, you got to respect the immigrants," and all of this stuff. And I'm telling you right now, if you come to Arizona and you don't stand for the pledge in a stadium full of Mexican immigrants, you will be given the dirtiest looks than you will anywhere else in the entire country. Like, people like Native Americans and Mexicans, they love this country. They're not ones that immigrated here illegally. You are not sending the message and speaking for these people at all. They totally disagree with you. These are Catholics.
Yeah. And I mean, so if you go to like a Cardinals game or something like that, or God forbid you go to a Phoenix Suns game, because why would you go to those games?
And got like the dirtiest looks by a bunch of Mexican immigrants in entire red, white, and blue, loving America. You don't represent these people. You in these isolated groups in LA and in New York that's creating this media. They have never been to these neighborhoods. They don't even know who these people are in the slightest. I know all this firsthand because I know how little research anybody does before they talk to me.
Yeah. I believe it. I mean, you have even some politicians where, I mean, they say things and it's like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney's out here, like, he's walking, like, in solidarity or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, Mitt Romney is probably like never even had like, I'm thinking to myself, like, how many conversations did Mitt Romney have when he was growing up, even with a black person? It's like in his mind, he was so removed from it.
There are areas, like I've said that too, about not finding racism in the country. I'm like, yeah, and I've been to pretty much states where I don't know how these people could be racist. They've never known a black person. They have no idea what you're talking about.
I mean, you go to other places. I mean, yeah, you go to like the South, Texas, Arizona, California. I mean, that are like, even the South, even for all the crap that the South gets. I mean, like, there's a lot, people interact, like different races interact far more in the South than you look at something like, I don't know, Vermont. Yeah. And it's, I mean, like you said, like from a practical standpoint, it's like, when you go to the supermarket and you have a white clerk and you're like a black patron, like you're checking out. I mean, like normally nothing ever happens. Like, I mean, that's been my experience like living in California. I mean, it's pretty racially diverse, and like on a day-to-day basis, like I interact with people of all different races. Like that's fairly common. And I don't really think anything that weird of it, where it's like, oh, I might have like an Asian clerk and then, like a Mexican bagger. Like, I don't, like, it's just, I don't know. I feel like I never even thought that was really that like weird of a thing, or I don't think it's weird at all, but I feel like in the last however many years it's been now, I feel like with kind of this like radicalization that's kind of starting online, I feel like people are now more conscious of it. I don't know, maybe I'm just more conscious of it, where in the past, I never even would have thought even anything of it.
Yeah, we kind of, as a country, did culturally subscribe to Martin Luther King's message to judge people by their merit, the content of their character, and not the color of their skin. We all abided by that. But that's the thing with these ideas, is there's never a line. There's never good enough. I think that's part of the problem with the current riots, is when justice was served the way you asked for it to be and you still protest, that sends a really confusing message to everyone. What's the actual protest? Are we losing the message because that's the justice system going towards what you asked for it to go towards?
No. Well, definitely. Well, Michael, yeah, I want to thank you so much, man, for coming on today. How can people follow your work and like everything that you publish and you write and everything? Like, how can people, like, how can we like keep up with everything that you're doing?
I don't know. I'm prone to isolation at times, so
Okay.
who knows? But I mean, largely, I'm working on doing most of my stuff will be on my LinkedIn page, and I focus a lot on getting the writing now. I've taken a much more pragmatic effect where I need to be publishing more literature, so that's going to be in scientific journals like criminology and things like that. I'm working on one right now, and I've published some books so people can jump on Amazon or jump on my LinkedIn and see those. The one is the study I did for my dissertation that went into the communal ethics and individual ethics juxtaposition. That's what my dissertation was on. This was completely unknown to me, that we had this philosophical problem where we don't have any unified message on the source of morality in this entire concept of policing. So you're essentially telling and judging police officers that they weren't moral or weren't ethical, and then establishing no guideline as to what moral or ethical is. And so that sends a confusing message that can't be remedied until you pull it in together. So that's pretty neat. And a more philosophical grounding book is called on Crimes and Punishment. And the whole series that I do is called The Business of Policing, because I have taken a police management approach, business management approach to dealing with police issues versus the traditional like criminal justice idea. I think policing is an organization with a CEO on top of it, with employees, just like any other. And to treat it differently is kind of very naive. Police aren't superheroes. They're human beings that respond to their environment and their incentives. So everything's about changing the environment and their incentives. I don't care if a cop is racist. I care if he does racist things.
Well, great. All right. Well, definitely, Michael, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk today, and I look forward to talking again sometime.
Of course, no problem. Anytime, any questions you get, I can get into more details. There's so many avenues where it's sometimes it's like when you say something like, oh, what, lead poisoning? Well, that's an entire subject. And I don't mind any of those pathways.
That one, to me, like I said, I mean, I have a little bit of homework to do after this one, because that I have never heard that before, and I really want to like look into that. And I mean, I am very fascinated by that. But all right, well, definitely. Well, thank you again for coming on, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks. Enjoy the rabbit hole.
All right, take care.